From above, it looks like a fairy tale. 175,000 square feet of French Renaissance elegance nestled into the soft hills of North Carolina. Gardens that could swallow city blocks. A roofline that pierces the sky like a crown. But beneath the gold leaf and marble floors, there's something else. A network of tunnels and passages so vast, so intricate, they stretch farther than some American towns. Cold, silent, built to stay hidden. And the question no one asks when they visit America's largest mansion is this: why does a house need an entire world beneath it? When George Washington Vanderbilt arrived in Asheville in 1888, he wasn't just building a home. He was building an escape. A kingdom where every detail could be controlled, every imperfection hidden, every uncomfortable truth buried out of sight. He was a lonely man, fragile, intellectual, the youngest son of America's wealthiest family. But wealth couldn't fix what haunted him. So he built Biltmore, not just as shelter, but as a machine. And every machine has parts designed to stay in the dark. At first, the tunnels were practical. Boilers, pipes, passageways for servants to move unseen, so the illusion of effortless luxury could remain intact. The mansion had to breathe, eat, and function. But none of that could disturb the guests. So the workers descended, and they stayed below. But as the years passed, something changed. Rooms were sealed without explanation. Wings of the estate went dark. Entire sections, both above and below, became forbidden. Staff reported hearing footsteps in tunnels that were supposed to be empty. Voices echoing through corridors no one had walked in years. Doors slamming in the dead of night, when the house was locked and silent. And when tragedy struck the Vanderbilt family, illness, financial ruin, sudden death, the tunnels absorbed it all. Because while the mansion above told the story of America's greatest luxury, the tunnels below told the story of what it cost. To understand the darkness beneath Biltmore, we have to understand the man who needed it. The man who built a kingdom, but couldn't escape himself. George Washington Vanderbilt was born into a world most people could only dream of. The youngest of 8 children, heir to one of the largest fortunes in American history. A name that opened every door, commanded every room, granted access to anything money could buy. But George didn't want what money could buy. He wanted what it couldn't. While his brothers built railroads, expanded empires, and dominated New York society, George disappeared into libraries. He spoke 8 languages. He collected rare books. He traveled across Europe, studying art, architecture, and the quiet elegance of old-world estates where history felt alive in every stone. He was gentle, introspective, and deeply, painfully alone, because wealth had given him everything except a place where he belonged. His family saw him as fragile. Society saw him as eccentric. And George saw himself as a man searching for something he couldn't name, until he found Asheville. It was 1888. George was 26 years old, visiting the Blue Ridge Mountains to escape the summer heat. And the moment he arrived, something shifted. The mountains didn't judge him. The fog didn't demand anything. The land stretched endlessly, untouched, waiting. And for the first time in his life, George Vanderbilt saw a place where he could be more than a name. He could be a creator, a visionary, a king of his own quiet kingdom. So he bought land. Not a few acres, not a modest estate. 125,000 acres. Forests, farms, entire villages, rivers and ridges and valleys that stretch beyond sight. He didn't just want a home. He wanted a world he could shape with his own hands, and at the center of it all, he would build a palace, not for guests, not for status, but for himself. The design was audacious: 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, a banquet hall that could seat hundreds, a library with 10,000 books, an indoor pool, a bowling alley, an organ built into the walls. It would be the largest private residence ever constructed in the United States. But more than that, it would be self-sustaining. George didn't just hire architects. He hired landscape designers, engineers, and foresters. He built a model farm, a dairy, a power plant, a working village with its own economy. Biltmore wasn't just a mansion. It was an empire in miniature. And George controlled every detail. The problem was scale. A house this massive didn't just need beauty. It needed infrastructure. It needed heat in the winter, power year-round, staff moving invisibly to maintain the illusion that everything simply worked. Guests couldn't see coal being hauled. They couldn't hear boilers roaring. They couldn't encounter servants carrying linens through hallways meant for royalty. So the engineers proposed something radical. They would build beneath the mansion, an entire underground system, tunnels wide enough for workers to move equipment, pipes carrying steam to every room, passageways connecting kitchens to dining halls, laundry rooms to bedrooms, storage vaults to service areas. The house above would be pristine, perfect, untouchable. The house below would be where the work happened, where the people who made the dream possible would live in shadow. George approved immediately, because that's what Biltmore was always meant to be: a place where he could control the narrative, where he could craft perfection without ever confronting the cost. Construction took 6 years, over 1,000 workers. Limestone shipped from Indiana, marble from Italy, ironwork from Philadelphia. Every detail obsessed over, refined, perfected. And on Christmas Eve, 1895, George Vanderbilt finally opened the doors to his kingdom. It was everything he'd dreamed. But dreams have a way of demanding more than we expect. Because while George had built a masterpiece above ground, he'd also created something else below it: a hidden world, a place where the illusion of effortless grandeur was sustained by invisible hands. And as the years passed, that hidden world would begin to hold more than just machinery. It would hold secrets, grief, and the weight of everything George Vanderbilt couldn't escape, even in a house designed to be perfect. If you visit Biltmore today, you'll walk through rooms that feel frozen in time, chandeliers that still gleam, tapestries that haven't faded, floors so polished you can see your reflection. But what you won't see is how any of it works. Because the genius of Biltmore wasn't just in what George built above ground. It was in what he hid below. The tunnel system beneath Biltmore Estate is an engineering marvel that most visitors never knew existed. Miles of corridors, steam pipes thick as tree trunks, boiler rooms that roared like furnaces, electrical conduits snaking through stone walls, storage vaults, mechanical rooms, passageways connecting every wing of the mansion to a central underground hub. It was a hidden city beneath a visible palace, and it served one purpose: to make the house above feel alive without ever revealing the machinery keeping it breathing. The main boiler room sat at the heart of it all. Massive coal-fed furnaces generated steam that traveled through insulated pipes, carrying heat to radiators in 250 rooms. In the dead of winter, when snow blanketed the Blue Ridge Mountains, Biltmore remained warm, comfortable, effortless. But someone had to feed those boilers. Someone had to shovel coal in the middle of the night. Someone had to monitor pressure gauges, check for leaks, and ensure the entire system didn't fail. And they did it all in the dark. Workers descended into the tunnels before dawn, and sometimes didn't emerge until after sunset. They moved through narrow passages lit by bare bulbs, the air thick with heat and the constant hum of machinery. Above them, guests sipped tea in the palm court, played billiards in the game room, danced under crystal chandeliers. They never heard the footsteps below. That was the point. The tunnels also served as arteries for the estate's staff. Servants used hidden staircases and underground corridors to move between the kitchens, laundry rooms, and guest quarters without ever appearing in the main halls. A meal prepared in the basement kitchen could arrive in the banquet hall without a single guest seeing who carried it. Linens could be changed, fires could be stoked, rooms could be cleaned, all while maintaining the illusion that the house itself was magic. George Vanderbilt had built a machine that erased labor from sight, and for a while, it worked exactly as intended. But the tunnels weren't just functional, they were isolating. Workers who spent their shifts underground reported a strange sense of disconnection. The tunnels were warmer than the surface in winter, colder in summer. Sound behaved oddly. Footsteps echoed for too long. Voices seemed to carry from nowhere. Some sections were barely lit. Others stretched so far that you could walk for minutes without seeing another person. And over time, stories began to circulate. A maintenance worker would hear footsteps behind him, only to turn and find the corridor empty. Doors would slam in sealed sections where no one was assigned. Lights would flicker in patterns that didn't match electrical faults. One account from the estate's early years described a night engineer hearing voices in a section of tunnel that had been closed off for repairs. When he investigated, he found the gate still locked. The voices stopped the moment he arrived. No one ever explained it. Management dismissed the stories as exhaustion, tricks of the mind after long shifts and poor lighting. But the workers knew what they'd experienced, and they began to avoid certain sections of the tunnels whenever possible. Because while the house above represented wealth and control, the tunnels below represented something else entirely. The cost of that illusion. The estate required around 80 full-time staff at its peak. Cooks, gardeners, stable hands, maids, electricians, engineers. Most lived on the property in staff quarters or nearby cottages, and many of them spent more time below ground than above it. They kept Biltmore running. They kept it warm. They kept it beautiful. But they were never part of the story. The tunnels ensured that. George Vanderbilt had created a system where comfort and luxury appeared effortless, where perfection seemed natural. But perfection always has a foundation, and Biltmore's foundation was built on people who worked in the dark. The irony, of course, is that the tunnels were supposed to protect the estate. Keeping boilers and machinery underground reduced fire risk. Centralizing utilities made repairs easier. Hiding staff preserved the atmosphere George wanted. But over time, the tunnels became something else. A place where things could be forgotten, where rooms could be sealed off without questions, where the boundaries between what was functional and what was hidden began to blur. Because once you build a system designed to keep secrets, it's only a matter of time before it starts holding them. And as George Vanderbilt's life began to unravel, the tunnels beneath his perfect mansion would become more than just machinery and passages. They would become a vault for grief, loss, and the shadows the family couldn't escape, even in a house built to keep everything under control. For a few years, Biltmore was everything George Vanderbilt dreamed it would be: a sanctuary, a masterpiece, a kingdom where he finally felt at home. But kingdoms are expensive to maintain, and dreams don't pay their own bills. By the early 1900s, the Vanderbilt fortune, once considered limitless, was beginning to fracture. The family's wealth had been built on railroads, and as the industry shifted, so did their dominance. George's older brothers had made risky investments. Legal battles drained resources. The empire that seemed eternal started showing cracks, and George, who had poured millions into Biltmore, suddenly found himself facing a reality he'd never planned for. He couldn't afford his own creation. The estate required a small army to operate: groundskeepers, engineers, cooks, stable hands, foresters managing 125,000 acres. The costs were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars every month just to keep the lights on, the boilers running, the gardens manicured. George began selling off land. First a few thousand acres, then more. Piece by piece, the kingdom he'd built started shrinking. But the mansion remained. And with it, the weight of maintaining an illusion that was becoming harder to sustain. Then his health began to fail. George had always been frail, quiet, prone to illness. But by 1912, his condition worsened. He suffered from complications that doctors couldn't quite explain: exhaustion, weakness, a body breaking down under stress it was never built to carry. He tried to rest. He traveled for treatment. But Biltmore, his dream, his escape, had become a burden he couldn't set down. And on March 6, 1914, George Washington Vanderbilt died during emergency surgery in Washington, D.C. He was just 51 years old. The man who built America's largest mansion never got to grow old in it. His death shattered the fragile structure holding Biltmore together. His wife, Edith, was left to manage an estate she'd never been trained to run. Their daughter, Cornelia, was just 13 years old. The staff didn't know if they'd keep their jobs. The bills kept coming. The house kept demanding. And the tunnels below grew quieter. Sections that had once buzzed with activity were closed off to save money. Boilers that heated unused wings were shut down. Entire corridors went dark. Staff reported walking past sealed doors and feeling a cold draft seep through the cracks. Rooms that had been vibrant just months before now sat untouched, their contents covered in dust, their windows shuttered. It was as if grief had seeped into the mansion's bones. Edith did her best. She was stronger than anyone expected. She managed finances, negotiated sales, and fought to keep Biltmore from collapsing entirely. But even she couldn't stop the slow erosion of what George had built. The estate that once hosted lavish parties and international guests became quieter, more private, more isolated. And with isolation came rumors, whispers among the staff, stories about rooms that were locked overnight without explanation, about belongings, George's belongings, being moved into storage deep within the tunnels where no one would ask questions. There were entire wings of the house that Edith refused to enter, spaces that held too many memories, too much pain. Some said she couldn't bear to face them. Others believed she was protecting something she didn't want the world to see. Because when someone dies, suddenly, especially someone as private as George, there are always things left behind. Letters, documents, personal struggles that were never meant to be public. and Biltmore had plenty of places to hide them. The tunnels became more than just infrastructure. They became a vault, a place where the past could be stored, sealed, and forgotten. Workers tasked with moving items underground described an eerie stillness in those deep corridors, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, the kind of darkness that feels like it's watching you. One account from a former staff member described being sent to retrieve equipment from a storage room in the sub-basement. As he unlocked the door, he heard what sounded like a woman crying, faint, distant, but unmistakable. He stopped, listened. Nothing. He entered the room, grabbed what he needed, and left as quickly as possible. He never went back alone. Another worker reported finding a stack of sealed boxes in a tunnel corridor he'd walked through 100 times. The boxes hadn't been there the day before. When he asked his supervisor about them, he was told to leave them alone. They were never mentioned again. The truth is, Biltmore's beauty was always fragile. It required constant attention, endless resources, and a family strong enough to carry the weight. But George was gone. The money was dwindling. And the house, the glittering, impossible house, was slowly becoming a monument to something lost. Edith and Cornelia stayed. They adapted. They survived. But the Biltmore they lived in was no longer the dream George had imagined. It was a shadow of that dream, a beautiful, haunted shadow. And beneath it all, in the cold tunnels where workers once moved with purpose, there was only stillness. The machinery still ran. The pipes still carried steam. But the heart of the house, the vision that had brought it to life, was gone. And in its place, something quieter remained. Something that didn't speak, didn't explain. Something that waited in the dark, holding the secrets the Vanderbilt family never intended to share. After George's death, Biltmore became something it was never meant to be. A business. Edith Vanderbilt was practical. She had to be. The estate was hemorrhaging money, and sentiment wouldn't save it. So she made decisions George never would have considered. She opened parts of the mansion to the public. She sold more land, thousands of acres that eventually became Pisgah National Forest. She leased the dairy operations. She turned the dream into something sustainable, and slowly, Biltmore survived. But survival came with compromise. The house that was built for privacy now welcomed strangers. The rooms designed for intimate gatherings became museum exhibits. The tunnels that once hummed with invisible staff were partially abandoned, partially repurposed, and entirely off-limits to visitors. Because some things, Edith decided, were better left unseen. Cornelia Vanderbilt grew up in a house that felt more like a relic than a home. She married young. She tried to carry the legacy forward. But the weight of Biltmore, the expectations, the history, the impossible grandeur, was too much. She eventually left, moved to Europe, distanced herself from the estate that had defined her family. And Biltmore passed to her sons, who turned it into what it is today, one of the most visited historic homes in America. Millions of people walk through its halls every year. They marvel at the architecture. They photograph the gardens. They stand in the banquet hall and imagine what it must have been like to live in such splendor. But very few of them know what's beneath their feet. The tunnel system still exists, most of it anyway. Some sections are maintained for mechanical purposes, modern heating, electrical systems, storage. Staff still use certain passages to move equipment without disturbing guests. But other sections? Sealed, abandoned, left exactly as they were decades ago. And that's where the stories persist. Modern employees, tour guides, maintenance workers, security have reported experiences that echo the ones from a century ago. Footsteps in empty corridors, doors that won't stay closed, cold spots in tunnels that have no ventilation issues, voices that seem to come from nowhere. One security guard described patrolling a restricted basement area late at night and hearing what sounded like a conversation. Two people talking in low, urgent tones. He followed the sound to a locked storage room. The voices stopped the moment he reached the door. He checked the room the next day. Empty. Undisturbed. Another employee reported seeing a figure in old-fashioned clothing walking through a tunnel near the original boiler room. When he called out, the figure turned a corner. By the time he reached the corner himself, the corridor was empty. No doors, no exits, just stone walls and silence. Management tends to dismiss these stories. Old buildings make noise. Shadows play tricks. Memory gets unreliable after long shifts. But the employees who've experienced it know better. Because Biltmore isn't just a house. It's a monument to ambition, obsession, and the cost of perfection. And monuments have a way of holding on to the past. There are still rooms in the mansion that aren't open to the public. Entire sections that remain off limits. Their contents known only to estate management and historians bound by discretion. Some say these rooms contain personal items too fragile to display. Others believe they hold records the family never wanted publicized. Financial documents, private letters, evidence of struggles that would tarnish the carefully curated image of Vanderbilt elegance. And then there are the tunnels, the ones that were sealed not because they were dangerous, but because they were unnecessary. Or at least, that's the official explanation. But if you talk to the workers who've been there long enough, they'll tell you something different. They'll tell you there are parts of the tunnel system that feel wrong. Not structurally, not mechanically, emotionally. Sections where the air feels heavier, where sounds don't echo the way they should, where even the most skeptical employees find themselves walking a little faster, looking over their shoulders, feeling watched by something they can't name. One former maintenance supervisor admitted off the record that he refused to send anyone into certain tunnels alone. Not because of safety violations, not because of hazards, because people came back shaken. And he couldn't explain why. The truth is, we'll never know everything that happened beneath Biltmore. We'll never know what George Vanderbilt stored in those tunnels during his final, desperate years. We'll never know what Edith sealed away after his death. We'll never know what grief, what secrets, what unresolved pain might still linger in the cold stone corridors beneath America's most beautiful mansion. But we know this: the house above tells the story of wealth, vision, and grandeur. The tunnels below tell the story of cost. And cost doesn't just disappear. It settles. It waits. It remains. Today, Biltmore sparkles. The gardens bloom. The tours continue. Millions of visitors leave enchanted by its beauty, inspired by its history, awed by its scale. And beneath their feet, in the hidden world George Vanderbilt built to stay invisible, the tunnels remain. Silent, dark, and holding on to whatever truths were never meant to see the light. Because while the mansion above was designed to be perfect, the world below was designed to be forgotten. And some things, once forgotten, prefer to stay that way.